Our next poet, a Renaissance man, a Canadian cultural catalyst, Don Cullen.
Delighted to be here, just delighted. The spirit of the Bohemian Embassy thrives.
Yes, it does.
You kind of got the feeling that none of this would be happening without Don.
I would not be where I am. I would not have the career I have. I would not have the life that I have had Don Cullen and the Bohemian Embassy pointed the way.
You just knew you'd be okay. You wouldn't get stage fright or anything because you'd done all of that at the Bohemian Embassy.
Why is there something rather than nothing? Was the question sincere, or was Leibniz just bluffing? If there was nothing, there would be no there, begging the question for us to ask where? I was brought up a fundamentalist Christian, and I learned the Bible pretty well, for which I am grateful. And my parents felt, because they were perhaps a little bit more blessed financially than a lot of other people, that they should have the Lord's work being performed at our house. So we did a lot of entertaining with missionaries and clergymen, and there was a lady who lived with us for a while, and she had a radio, and my parents had moral contortions about buying a radio. It was the outbreak of World War II that encouraged them to get a radio. But prior to that, the world, the flesh, and the devil would be coming through the radio, and that was not acceptable. So they were quite puritanical. But this lady was a United Church lady who listened to the opera on Saturday afternoons. And since I wasn't able to go to the movies, the Saturday afternoon matinee, I would listen to Die Goethe Dämmerung or some Wagnerian opera. Nobody told me that it was difficult, so I enjoyed it and developed a kind of interest in classical music. I went to High Park Baptist Church. On some levels, I'm very grateful for that because it caused me to be really interested in philosophy. And as a result, I went through a period of, I would say, about 11 years before I finally came to the conclusion that I didn't believe in the supernatural at all. So I became an atheist. The Bible's full of babble, but it's useful for playing Scrabble and motivating rabble, just the thing. When I went to Humberside Collegiate, I had developed a really good facility imitating teachers. And that was so that the kids would come up to me and say, "Hey, Don, do Mr. Taylor. Do Mr. McClellan, do Mr." And so I would do these for the entertainment of my peers. And then I was dared to go into the drama club, and the first thing that we did, I was able to use a New England accent because we did Our Town by Thornton Wilder, and I began to realize that I did this rather well, actually. And people encouraged me and so forth. And I auditioned for a group called the Young Canada Players, but my father was adamant that I not participate in that, partly because they rehearsed on Sunday. And other than that, I think the entertainment business was very suspect in our family. I noticed that I really wanted to work at CBC because I adored CBC radio so much. And so I kept bugging a lady by the name of Marjorie Hand Finally, she said, we've got a job for you in the TV news department. As the lowest form of life, you would be a copy clerk there. That was wonderfully fortuitous for me because I stayed there for almost 4 years. And during that time, I started the Bohemian Embassy coffee house and all that entails. There was a character in the television news department who didn't like the Celebrity Club, which was across the street from the CBC on Jarvis. And he got a group of people who were willing to put $100 in a piece, and he would equal that. And as we were going in for the first meeting, he turned to me and he said, "Don, will you chair the meeting?" And I said, "Why? I don't have an agenda. This is your idea." "No, Don, please do," So I ended up chairing the meeting. And I just said, "What kind of a club would you like to have?" And everybody looked at each other and said, "I don't know." And I had visited a house on Indian Grove. Harry Mills had this house. He was the president of the High Park Tennis Club. And he had a kind of combination between an Edwardian salon and a beatnik hangout in his house. He had a bunch of musical instruments. He had an enormous record collection. And people would go there almost every night to have coffee, and that stuck in my mind. So we started the Bohemian Embassy with $500. And then I went off to the University of Toronto with flyers that I made on a duplicating machine at the CBC. And I would go to football games, and if I saw a little knot of people after the game, I would go up to them and say, "Would you like some subversive literature?" I felt that a coffee house should really be omnivorous. Let's have a place where all kinds of different things happen. And all of the other places were one kind of function, and that was it. And to be sure, folk music was making most of our money, but I thought to myself, should we have a reading series? And I have read my family history because it is my responsibility to know who I am, that I might take all necessary precautions against my own vicious inclinations. There was, in fact, a subculture of literary people in Toronto, and Margaret Atwood came out of that, Gwen MacEwen, Al Purdy, who's now a statue in Queen's Park, and all these wonderful people. And a chap came up to me one day and he said, "Why don't you do a satirical review here, like Spring Thaw, but in a cabaret kind of situation?" And eventually I said, "Why don't you do it?" And we put together a show called The Village Review that got an amazing rave review from Nathan Cohen, who is a very, very difficult reviewer on the Star. And all of a sudden we had people all the way down 2 flights of stairs, along St. Nicholas Street, and along Wellesley to Yonge, trying to get in. I had to go down and say, "I'm sorry, we can only seat 150. Barry Baldaro said to me, "I want you to be in the show." And I said, "No, Barry, that's bad taste, bad form. I own the place." And he said, "No, but you can do a Russian accent, and we've got this sketch that needs a Russian accent." And so I went into the show, and within 2.5 years, I was on Broadway with Beyond the Fringe, the all-time granddaddy of satirical shows. And wow, you know, it just happened that way. And I consider myself incredibly lucky. I met a kid by the name of Lorne Lipowitz. And Lorne changed his name a few years later to Michaels and founded Saturday Night Live. Lorne came to me, I guess, after he'd been at the University of Toronto and had directed a show at the University College. I think they called it the Follies or something like that. I went up to his place and I heard the reel-to-reel show, and it was not very good. But Lorne said, "I hear you're doing another review at the Bohemian Embassy." And I said, "Yes, but it's only two of us, Barry Baldaro and myself, a two-man review." And he said, "Let me direct it." So eventually he did. So he directed the first show, and it had legs, as people say. And we played at the Bohemian Embassy. We went to Ottawa and played at Libu, and we went to, I guess, North Bay and a couple of other places, because it was a portable show. And came back, and Lorne and his girlfriend, Wayne Shuster, said, "Why don't the three of us produce the show at the Colonnade Theatre?" And we did. We produced the show there, and Frank Shuster, Roz's father, came to the show. And out of that, I got 25 years on Wayne and Shuster. Talk about luck, you know, like, wow. I just walked into these things. I saw Beyond the Fringe at the O'Keefe Center. Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, and Jonathan Miller. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I mean, I was rolling with laughter and the insight and the idea that a show expected the audience to know something. When I read in the newspaper that they were having open auditions at the O'Keefe Center for Beyond the Fringe, I went down. Why not? And a year and a bit later, I got a phone call from New York, and they said, "Would you like to be in Beyond the Fringe?" And I said, "How much do I owe you?" Because, you know, I thought, what a privilege that was. And I think I preferred the stage because the audience tells you how you're doing. That's wonderful. You know, you listen to the audience, and if you have a funny line, laughter peaks and then starts to die down, and there are one or two places in the descending sound where you hit them with the next line. And it's a game. It's like playing chess, only there's no loser. You're both the audience and the performers are winners in that situation, and that to me is so rewarding.
Why would there be nothing just 'cause we conceive it? If there was nothing, no one would perceive it. Here is an answer, you might as well book it. There can't be just nothing. Where would you put it?
Well, I'm Inspector McEwen of Scotland Yard.
McEwen of the Yard?
Aye, the game's afoot. This is my first trip on the Flounder. What's the captain really like?
I joined Wayne and Shuster in 1965. I was always a little insecure because I didn't know whether my contract would be renewed, but it always was. So when I was a kid, I saw Alec Guinness on British films, and he was radically different from one role to another. and you almost had a hard time recognizing him. And I thought, boy, that's an actor. And I used to like to go into the makeup people and say, can you give me a mustache or a beard or a pair of glasses or whatever it was, because I kind of like to run into people who said, you were on Wayne and Shuster? I never saw you on Wayne and Shuster. And that actually made me feel good. And they kept me around to do dialect work, a lot of that sort of thing.
Man is a wanderer by nature, constantly piqued by curiosity.
And let the kettle to the trumpet speak. Well, we all gotta talk that way at Stratford.
I did, Captain, but it just couldn't accept your last remark.
Back to the Bohemian Embassy, and I was exposed to an awful lot of teenage angst and some bad poetry and some heroic attempts, and sometimes a line or two or a complete poem would knock me sideways because it was eloquent and stated something that was meaningful. Having all of this input, and eventually say, well, I'll try a poem or two, and I've got this idea, and something's niggling away at me that I want to express, and I'll do it this way, you know. So then I began to realize that poetry could actually be used politically, philosophically.
Don't say that God was invented out of fear. Don't say the Almighty is a metaphor for what we do not know. Don't tell me humankind is the only responsible agency for what happens on the planet. Don't say the buck stops only here. Don't talk to me about personal responsibility. Do not take the breast away from me.
And it just seems to me that we have to be very, very careful on planet Earth, because I don't think that the supernatural is going to bail us out. I don't have that confidence because I don't believe in the supernatural. I think the buck stops here. We are responsible. I remember when I became an atheist, I didn't say, hey, now I can do anything. Now I said, hey, the responsibility devolves on me.
A great deal of the success of my life is a matter of luck, which I understand is probably true for a lot of people in the arts. Just stumbling into the right situation at the right time, and bingo, something happens. My name is Donald Austin Cullen, and I am all of these things because I am insecure, because I am vulnerable, because I belong to the human species.
What do you do when the left side of your brain is about equal to the right? What do you do when a little gray cloud, not black, not white, but gray, follows you about, never dropping rain, at least partially blocking the sun? What do you do when your opponents seem reasonable, when your allies lack sense or conviction? You stand partially erect and in a voice not soft, not loud, announce, I am a Canadian, and semi-proud of it.